Excellent. So welcome everybody to our webinar today, 3rd of July. It's our H2 Talk series of events, and we talk today about lead markets. Lead markets as a possibility to drive the clean hydrogen demand while boosting Europe's competitiveness. And I would like to guide you through the very concept of lead markets in the very beginning with some slides. We go next slide, please. Yep. So lead markets are basically a possibility to implement the Clean Industrial Deal possibly a little bit faster. And Hydrogen Europe is discussing on lead markets, especially for the markets of fertilizers, refineries, and steel. Today, we will talk a little bit more later on fertilizers and steel, not so much on refineries, but basically lead markets will help to implement the Renewable Energy Directive a little bit faster than foreseen, because the RED III, as we know it, and as has been foreseen by the co-legislators, takes quite a lot of time to be transposed into national law. And that's what needs to be done in order to basically create a hydrogen demand in industry. And the industries that are affected by these industry targets, 42% of hydrogen used in these industries need to be replaced by renewably produced hydrogen. That's a lot, and that's good. However, the member states did not transpose this. The deadline was 21st of May, and only 2 member states at that date transposed: Romania and Czech Republic, not very well known for so many industrial activities in that field. However, lead markets as a regulatory sandbox could be focusing on certain industries and do what? They could use the following tools. You see that here. First of all, they label the carbon footprint for certain consumer products. So consumers of steel, of refined products, or of fertilizers know that the carbon footprint is much lower. There's a clear label. Secondly, there needs to be a supply incentive. That's what we want to do in lead markets. We want to bring basically people who are producing together and say, you get an incentive by a lower CO2 tax, or by subsidy, by a production quota, like in RED III, as we have heard, or demand incentives by obliging the supply chain, by obliging the off-takers to go that way. Let me show you one example of a label. We go next slide. The steel colleagues have worked on a classification label for quality steel. I don't want to go into detail here, but basically what you see, it reminds us very much what we see on our fridges. So it's different categories of cleanliness, of low carbon footprint. And the cleanest would be the use, you see that in A, the use of hydrogen, renewably produced hydrogen, in the direct reduction of iron ore. So that's steel under the ideal conditions. And this is what you then would find on your steel product, the different categories. So how was your steel produced? This opens also the possibility, I say this clearly from the very beginning, to use a direct reduction of iron ore facility with gas. Why that? Because you can use it with gas. You decarbonize 60% compared to coal production method, but it's gas, it's still fossil. And if you then go to clean up the molecule via clean forms of hydrogen, be it electrolytic or be it CCS hydrogen, you can reach the A. What would that, so to say, mean for the customer? If we go to the next slide, I can say negligible costs. There's there's nearly no impact for a green steel car buyer. There's a considerable for a ship manufacturer. Here you see how the cost would go up in steel production if we would use the greenest form of steel production, the direct reduction of iron ore with renewable hydrogen. And you see it's 43%. However, the car producer and especially the buyer of a car wouldn't feel it. It would be only for him 0.5% of more cost, so 191 euro for a car. In a wind turbine, it is a little bit more, it's 3%, but also not considerable. For the ship manufacturing, it makes a bigger impact, it's 9%. So here you see that there is a different impact for the customers, but in the end, it is acceptable. Are these corporations already happening? Yes, next slide, please. There are first movers that are procuring already green or low carbon products. And this is very important, but at the moment, not driving to large investment volumes. So we see cooperation, for instance, in the methanol production. So Moeve, which is a member company of Hydrogen Europe, will supply e-methanol to Maersk as a shipping fuel. European Energy will supply renewable-based methanol to Lego. And we also have seen recently a project for data centers, also in Denmark, also based on e-methanol in Kassel for the use in data centers. When it comes to the ammonia world, we see the cooperation of BASF, that is its own off-taker, using green ammonia to produce fertilizers and melamine. But also Yara, we will have Yara today in our H2 talk, will supply to PepsiCo and Landmannen low carbon fertilizers for their agricultural products. And I'm sure Vibeke later on will tell us more about it. In the steel field, we see corporations between Stegra, that will supply green steel to Mercedes, Benz and Porsche. We also have today SSAB, same category. And also green steel supplied to IKEA. Stegra is doing a lot of visibility in that field. But today we would like to give the visibility to SSAB, another Swedish steel company, also going that way. Let us see what the lead markets would add to the hydrogen volume that we foresee until 2030. Next slide, please. So here you see that there are different potentials from different obligations or from different opportunities that we see in hydrogen. So as of today, we can see that data centers, for instance, is 1 million ton that is added. Clean ammonia is 1.9 million tons that could basically on the lead markets be achieved. Clean steel until 2030, I have to say only, because it's then rising very much so, nearly 1 million ton. The biggest potential lies in refining. There we have also sub-targets and Renewable Energy Directive third recast, RED III, the transport target, which helps us to achieve these quite considerable volumes. Good news here is that member states more and more explain how they would like to transpose the transport target in that international law. We have seen the recent proposal from Spain, very, very recently this week. 10 days ago, we saw, make me very happy, a proposal from Germany with a trajectory even until 2045. And 12% of all fuels need to be then basically cleaned with hydrogen. That's a lot. And also France came up with an interesting trajectory. Not only 1% of all fuels, but 2% until 2035 need to be cleaned up with hydrogen. So here you see why refining brings the biggest potential. But also maritime, we are waiting for the IMO, International Maritime Organization, decision in autumn telling how high the fine will be for those not abiding by their new internal rules. That's a little bit of EU rules, but mainly IMO. And then we have eSAF, that's sustainable air fuels used in aviation. That is only 0.3%, but with a clear trajectory. And this starts already right now. This is already on, basically, and it's obliging. And this is very, very good. And also being to be higher very, very soon after 2030 because of the higher trajectory. All in all, 8.6 million tons of hydrogen production per year by 2030. It's good. It's not 10 million tons, but it's nearly 10 million tons. So who did do all these legislation? Of course, our legislators, and I'm very, very happy today to welcome one of the leading members of parliament. Next slide, please. Jens Geier. Jens Geier is a member of the European Parliament. He's in the Social Democratic group. He was the rapporteur, so the chief negotiator on the gas and hydrogen package. He knows the sector very, very well. We have been colleagues, Jens, I have to say this, we have been colleagues in the European Parliament in both in the ITRE committee, but also in the Committee of Budget Control, where you also are still active. You have been the head of the SPD, of the Social Democratic delegation in the European Parliament. And you know very well from your constituency and your home region, which is the Ruhr area, so the city of Essen as the capital of the Ruhr area, about all these lead markets, because we have chemical production there, we have, of course, refining there, and we have steel production there. So you're fully aware with all these markets and the lead markets. And you are very close to Teresa Ribera, the executive vice president of the European Commission, and she is co-responsible for the lead markets. She likes the idea, and she's actively involved in the preparation of the Clean Industrial Accelerator Act that will be presented later on this year. Without further ado, I would like to give you, dear Jens, the floor.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Jorgo. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. The times are challenging. I'm just coming out of another video conference where we discussed something what is related to the topic we have this afternoon, the perspective of electricity price for industry, and that describes the challenge we are in. Yesterday, I heard a colleague saying a wise sentence that was like, we have now a Green Deal. We did a lot for the protection of the climate, but this Green Deal doesn't have a business case. And when we started this turn of the European Parliament in 2024, I saw that a lot of ideas we had about the development of hydrogen, the uptake, are behind schedule. That's on the one hand true. On the other hand, we have a lot of troubles with the competition, worldwide competition of our key industries. And now we have to look on every angle how we do it. And I'm still how we cope with that problems. And I'm still absolutely convinced that hydrogen has to play an important role on that. May it be the blue one, may it be the green one. I in person would like to have enough green hydrogen produced as soon as possible, but I'm also have been the rapporteur of the Parliament for the hydrogen strategy. And since we have outlined the strategy with the majority of the European Parliament, we are quite aware that we start with the blue one. I'm not here to discuss the delegated acts. It would be worth it, but we are here. I'm here to discuss with you the possibility of a major tool to drive the the demand, and that would be lead market. And as Jorgo has already introduced me, coming from the Ruhr area, and I have the political responsibility for the city of Duisburg, what is Jorgo's birthplace, and but it's still the biggest steel producing city in Europe, but they are struggling. And one of the proposals that is also coming down from the Commission on the lead market is to help the steel industry. So the lead markets for steel already play a role in the strategic proposal of the European Commission for the Steel and Metals Action Plan. That was something that was demanded by the Parliament in the last term very intensively, and I had the pleasure to provide the incoming Commission with the proposal of a steel action plan made by the social partners, what is Eurofair and Industry All, where also the lead markets play an important role. Because when we know about the high energy prices we have in Europe, that might be from one member state to the other, also added by a specific tax system that might be to the disadvantage of low energy prices. And we know that we need the energy to produce hydrogen, where it is absolutely necessary that we give the hydrogen an edge on the industrial side to tackle the international competition. And a quota could do that job. What that is not exactly inside the proposals of the Commission, but what is already, and I'm quite happy about, is inside the proposals of the Commission is to create demand and overcome the hen and egg problem by a lead market system that could introduce non-price criteria in public procurement. And how could that be possible? By adding characteristics that can be fulfilled and can drive public procurement in areas where they're not obliged to go with the best price, but also with other characteristics that could be circular in steel production, for example, or that could be resilient. And I would also translate resilient with local, because resilient only makes sense when you say we look for a working steel sector in the European Union in order not to be reliant on or dependent on exports from outer EU sources. What is only possible when we give them an edge when it comes to prices. To promote the uptake of H2 is especially mentioned in the Clean Industrial Deal. That is another strategy paper recently published by the European Commission on how to go on with the decarbonization of the industry. And the label that has already been mentioned by Jorgo is one of the instruments that are upcoming with the IDAA. The Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act is announced for the end of the year. Maybe it will be the beginning of the next one, but it should do the job of solving the problem that we have. How do we decarbonize on the one hand and keep industry compatible on a global level on the other. The instruments are there. They are proposed. We are now eager to work on that from the proposals coming down from the Commission side. And I'm very much looking forward to that, but also with some concern, because I learned that Commission works in silos. And what we get from the cabinet, from the college now are strategic papers that address the problems of energy, of affordable steel, of also of global compatible industry quite exactly. I'm happy to a big extent what has come down from the Commission on that. Of course, it is not perfect. Of course, we have to work on that. Of course, we can add some good ideas, but I'm a little bit concerned when it comes to the special legislation that we have to keep a closer eye on that. I'm very close to the steel industry, and when you approach Commission with the problems of steel and with hydrogen as a solution, you get different answers from DG Trade and from DG Climate, from DG Energy, or from DG Growth. And while the strategic papers now, and for our question here, the Steel and Metals Plan and the CRD is crucial, are quite promising. We have to look whether these promises are fulfilled with a concrete proposal like the EDAA that will be upcoming, and that will be a key legislative act which I would personally like to work on for the near future, that can then also transfer the idea of lead markets and the industry in concrete measures. I will stop with that, and thank you for your patience.
Many thanks, Jens. So first important news we just got: you might be the rapporteur for this important piece of legislation. This is good. This is good to know. We know that you are somebody who knows the markets very well, knows the dossier, and you are close to the markets. Can we talk a little bit before we enter later on in the discussion? You will stay as far as I understood the panel. Can I ask you about the Commission? Let me describe, and you said you don't want to talk, and we don't want to talk about the Delegated Act, and yes, we don't do. However, I remember I had a fantastic discussion with Teresa Ribera, 8th of January this year. Dan Jørgensen was also in that meeting, basically the two leading social democrats in the Commission. And despite the fact that she said, listen, we don't want to change these delegated acts, let's keep it there, she was very interested in understanding how lead markets could create an environment, a so-called regulatory sandbox, where you have a light system. Yeah? So the DRI at the moment, so the steel companies got a lot of money, but the terms of reference say only green hydrogen. In the regulatory sandbox, you can be a little bit more flexible. You can start, as we said already, with gas, but you have a clear timeline. What's your understanding? I mean, I share your view that the Commission is thinking in silos, which is, it's a pity. It's not good, because it would be better if we would have I mean, you in the Parliament are more coherent sometimes than the Commission, I have to say, which tells a lot. But do you think we can expect, nevertheless, by this piece of legislation, the decarbonization, the accelerator of this, a piece of legislation that is really substantial? I can just share one idea, and then I would love to hear your answer. Mrs. von der Leyen announced the Hydrogen Bank. The Hydrogen Bank is a fantastic concept, but if you go then to the nitty-gritty and see how this Hydrogen Bank is basically created and who benefits and in what timeline, it's not working that fast. It's not working that efficiently. It's also driving the prices down. And this is what we need to avoid in the lead markets, because we want to have to be paid for the price it has, and not to drive prices down. By that, bring companies out of their normal balance, and then they are out. So we don't see that this mechanism so far achieved big advancements because it's too theoretical and because it's always to the bottom of the price line. What we need in lead markets is quality. We need not the race to less price, to less costs, but to more quality and quality costs. Do you think we can expect from that commission that next week you will vote on confidence whether or not Mrs. von der Leyen will continue? You might comment on that as well. But do you expect that the commission will come up with a coherent piece which brings us forward, or is it again this fluffy thing that is not helping? What's your opinion?
It shouldn't be the second. It should be absolutely the first. And yeah, thanks for the compliments. Sometimes Parliament is more coherent than Commission, and the trick behind that is we have to make compromises over political groups, incorporate different views on a topic in order to strike a majority, and that sometimes adds up in a little bit more pragmatism than we know from the Commission. So I think the IDIA will be something like a proving point where the Commission can go on with its consistent theory. And I think that the geopolitical situation plays to our place, if I can say so, a positive role, because resilience comes in as a big question. Defense policy comes in as a thing of major European concern, what underlines the necessity of resilience again and to a higher degree. So Europe has to be ready to defend itself, and to defend itself on all levels, it has to be resilient. That means we have to control, as you said before, all the steps of the value chain, and we have to produce that in Europe. And in order to keep up with the prices, there is no other. There is lead markets is one of the chance to bring these ideas together. So I would very much welcome when the Commission would follow what you have described in the first place for the IDIA, and if they don't, it's on the lawmakers, and that's then we come in. So would be better when we have it in the draft, but if it's not in the draft, I'm convinced that Parliament will change it.
Excellent. I was informed that out of your Bundesland, your region in Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia, yesterday there was a delegation of CEOs, of 15 CEOs, visiting Mrs. von der Leyen.
Yeah.
And it was discussed to create something like a resilience alliance. Very interesting. So I pick up what you just said. Please stay with us, and we'll come back to you, Jens. And I would now like to open the panel. We welcome on the panel Agnes Borg. She is the head of EU affairs at SSAB. This is a Swedish steel company. She's here last on the list. So Agnes, head of EU affairs, SSAB. And she leads the company's engagement with EU institutions. We also have here, I go from, and ladies first, Vibeke Rasmussen. She is the vice president, senior vice president, Yara Clean Ammonia. So she is very, very actively involved in Hydrogen Europe also, and she knows the fertilizer industry, the international fertilizer industry, very, very well. Has also developed a broad experience in the field of sustainability, how to make fertilizers more sustainable. And then we have also Philipp Jäger. He's Senior Policy Fellow for European Climate and Economic Policy at the Jacques Delors Center of the Hertie School. Very, very European policy center, and his analyses are focused on the EU's clean industrial policy. So he's exactly the right man for today's discussion, as well as on the interplay between the EU's climate policy and macroeconomic development. He worked as an economic and policy analyst for the EU Commission also, so he knows the silo thinking. And I would like to start with you, Philip, because you can give us basically the overview. You are the author of a paper that I read on industrial policy, and you recently wrote, if a cautious approach sets the tone for upcoming dossiers, the clean industrial deal will fall short, resulting not just in missed climate targets, but in a permanent loss of EU industrial capacity. That was what Jens just said. Technological know-how and strategic autonomy. That's a rather damning vision. So how do you see the EU successfully tackle this decarbonization competitiveness dilemma, possibly with lead markets? Philip, you have the floor.
Thanks so much for the invitation. And maybe I should preset my comments that I'm not all pessimistic. And you picked a citation which I stand by, but there's a big if in there, right? So what I'm saying there is, if the EU is too cautious in its implementation of the Clean Industrial Deal, then we have a problem. But there's still some time to get this right. So the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act will be the first kind of litmus test on whether or not the level of ambition is high enough. But yeah, maybe also to comment quickly on the silo thinking and on the coherence that Jens Geier also mentioned. And I think actually the Clean Industrial Deal as a strategy is quite coherent, and it's a good strategy. And then the silo thinking happens more when we get into the implementation and the more granular legislation. And there it's a problem, but it's actually a strength in my view, and in our analysis, we find this, that compared to previous industrial strategies, now the Clean Industrial Deal is actually quite coherent, because it brings together, for the first time really at the EU level, the three industrial policy tools that the EU has, and that's regulations like lead markets, as we're talking about today, but it's also trade policies, and it's also state aid frameworks, so steering national subsidies in the right areas. And so the Clean Industrial Deal does a pretty decent job at both sticking to climate targets and improving competitiveness, and then having kind of this coherent overarching vision. But because the Clean Industrial Deal is just a strategy so far, the implementation is uncertain. And yeah, it's the early signs that we see from the action plans on automotives, on metals and steel, and then whatever is going to come out of the chemicals action plan, indicates that the level of ambition might be a bit too low. And so in our recent analysis, we kind of give four recommendations that I thought could be also worthwhile to share here real quick, what the Commission can do to ensure that the clean industrial objectives are reached. And that's first, to be very ambitious with the specific instruments that are in the pipeline. So lead markets is one of them, and that's a crucial one, but there are also others. Second, and that's a criticism that often applies to the EU, and you mentioned earlier, is speed. So yeah, we can wait till the end of the decade until we get lead markets and the forceful instruments. That needs to happen on a much more accelerated timeline. And third, there also needs to be more clarity on who does what. So the Commission needs to be more explicit on what the member states do, what the EU level can do, and then what the private sector must do. And at the moment, that's often quite unclear who's supposed to do what. And then fourth, but not least, the Clean Industrial Deal outlines these action plans that I mentioned, but only for certain sectors. There's no coherent plan at the moment for the cement industry, for glass, for paper, so the energy-intensive industries. And there's also not one for battery manufacturing. For wind manufacturing, it's also, there's still open questions, strategic ones that need to be solved. So adopting some additional sector-specific plans will also help to align this sector-specific legislation that is now about to come. It will also help with the silo thinking and the isolated approaches that some of the DGs are pursuing at the moment. And yeah, as I said, I'm not all pessimistic. I think there's still enough time to get to an ambitious Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, including with strong lead markets.
Many thanks for your observation. You said we need to be bold, so I will come back later on to you, but I would like to ask you, because you say it's already coherent, is it also focusing on European strengths? So I'll give you an example. We had yesterday the launch of a global mobility alliance, of course, focusing on hydrogen. And I'm very blunt here. We were in the parliament, Jens. There were 6 MEPs. The room was full. It was a breakfast. It was really cracking and good discussion. The commission was there, represented by DG Grow, just referred to the numbers, said, these are the numbers of hydrogen cars, hydrogen trucks. And they said, it's not a lot. So we are not focusing on it. So you're focusing on what? I took the floor and said, on batteries, right? Okay, we have become a colony in digital terms of the US. We are definitely a colony here. That's clear. I think it doesn't need to discuss that. But when it comes to automotive, with this strategy, and we have seen that battery initiatives have failed big time. We have only 2 battery factories that are European in Europe, in France. The rest is Korean or Chinese, and the Chinese are taking over the Koreans even in Europe. I said we are becoming a colony in automotive of China. It's very clear. So I'm not here to listen from the Commission to read out the numbers. I know them myself. What are we doing to tackle the problem of the gap? We see the numbers of China investing into this. So they create their lead markets by totally different terms. I would like to ask you here, are we fast enough? Because you said you're not so critical, but basically you are. Are we fast enough? Are we bold enough? Should we give super credits again to Tesla and Elon Musk? Or should we come later on to steel, give super credits to those OEMs that are producing cars based on green steel? That's a very, very simple question.
Sure. I agree with you that Europe needs to focus on its strengths, and that doesn't always happen. I mean, so for instance, in the Net Zero Industry Act, you have domestic manufacturing targets for solar PV. And on solar PV, at least for the current generation of technology, Europe is just too far behind. And so that for the next couple of years, that shouldn't be a big priority for the EU to reshore that type of technology back to Europe. Whether or not hydrogen vehicles should be a priority, I think I'm going to stay out of this for now.
I'll check your questions.
But I agree with your last point that the EU needs to be very bold. And I think when you look at the problem analysis and also at the narrative in the Clean Industrial Deal, then that sounds very bold. The question now will be, will the implementation be commensurate to that? And I think there's still a long way to go to ensure that that happens. And on the somewhat more specific point that you raised, whether we should have buy European clauses, here I think it's not so important where the company is headquartered, whether it's Korean companies that produce in Europe, as long as they produce in Europe, and that's not just so-called screwdriver facilities that, import basically everything to Europe, then change a screw and say it's a European product. So we need to prevent that. But as long as foreign companies are willing to invest in Europe, that should be fine. But
Agree.
with the lead markets, I think two areas need to be pursued here, and that's sustainability criteria, and then for some products also the Buy European criteria or resilience criteria that you mentioned. And for the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, they need to come and they need to be bold.
Basically, in the second tender of the Hydrogen Bank, we have this Buy European criterion. Somehow it's don't buy Chinese. It's not Buy European, it's don't buy Chinese. So the European Commission did that, and we are very grateful for that. But we need to see how we can further strengthen this. Let's come to steel, because we talked a lot about steel. Let's hear from the steel industry. And Agnes, again, I said it, is the EU Affairs head at SSAB. dear Agnes, in 2016, SSAB, together with LKAB and Vattenfall, launched the Hybrid project, a pivotal industrial decarbonization project. We are very proud that this project features in our first edition of the Hydrogen Heroes. So we made this project a Hydrogen Hero, both for the steel and the hydrogen sector, very important. Now in operation as a pilot, you are producing decarbonized steel and supplying European companies on pilot scales. How was your experience dealing with the green premium? Are companies ready to make the switch to decarbonized products? Agnes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jorgo, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to be part of this discussion this afternoon. So indeed, as you said, so SSAB, we are a Nordic and US-based steel company specialized in high-strength steel and also with a strong global presence. And we have two objectives, one related to the steels and one to the company. And regarding the steel, it's about introducing decarbonized steel on the market as commercial products. And on the company, it's really about being a leader in the green transformation and eliminate largely CO2 emissions from our own operations. And we're currently investing to transform our Swedish production system over 5 billion euros. And we are doing this really with the need to, on the one hand, modernize our facilities, but also it's about maintaining innovative edge and to meet demand for decarbonized steels, which we're also discussing here today. But of course, in addition, the investments in the transformation of the production system can reduce Sweden's CO2 emissions by about 10%. So you mentioned the hybrid technology that we have developed together with our partners and the pilot plant that we have in operation since 2020. And we have learned a lot from this that we can now use for the industrial productions. And the results have already been so good that we have been able to make pilot deliveries of this fossil-free steel to strategic companies. But of course, now at this point, when it comes to fossil-free steel, the deliveries that we talk about have been at a pilot scale. So to your question, we have seen that there is increasing private sector demand for decarbonized products. We see that several industries and companies, and these include also SSAB customers, are really working on cutting their own emissions, and they have set ambitious goals for climate impact. And when it comes to materials, of course, choosing the right steel can be an important contributor. So to date, we have about 60 partnerships in place with the customers who want to ensure access to decarbonized steels.
Can I ask you, Agnes, already from the chat, I saw a question about the willingness to pay. You are partnering now with on a volunteer basis, basically, with partners. But what about using tax on steel to compensate the external cost of steel production? Would that be something you would like to see? I took this question from the chat.
Well, I think, your question was about willingness to pay and about consumer demand. So I think there, as mentioned, we see interest from the customers in reducing climate impact. And in Sweden, I mean, there is already CO2 tax, for example, for a long time. It's something that the country, I think, knows quite well. I think indeed, when it comes to SSAB's decarbonized steel, they will have a premium in the marketplace compared to conventional steel, as they have the additional value of being made without fossil CO2 emissions. So we do see that customers are willing to accept this so-called green premium to a certain extent.
And congratulations to Sweden being such a front runner here. I mean, you have always been a leading country in iron ore and steel, but now it's SSAB and also Stegra. So Stegra, which is one of the other company. You want to say a few words on why the conditions in Sweden are so good for steel?
Yes, I think there are several factors playing into this. And as I mentioned before, so SSAB wants to be taking a first mover step in the green transformation, also because there are the conditions to do so in the Nordics. So we have production in the Nordics in Sweden and Finland. And as mentioned, are transforming the system. On the one hand, we already have a decarbonized electricity and grid, and this is already for a long time. So we do have access to fossil-free electricity. Of course, demand will increase with the transformation of industry, but already we have a fossil-free electricity and grids. And then, of course, we have also a large part of the value chain in the Nordics. So we have, you mentioned LKAB, so the iron ore provider. They also, have their value chain, the iron ore in the north of Sweden. So we have that also in place. And I think from SSAB's side, so we have been making steel for a long time, and we have already several customers and partnerships in place. So I think we are also from that perspective well placed to form these fossil-free partnerships that we mentioned already now. But to the theme that we are discussing today, of course, it's the companies that need to transform, but it's also the policy that sets the framework. And we also welcome the emphasis really on creating more demand, on creating lead markets for more sustainable products, including decarbonized steel or low emission steel, because we really need to make this happen also at larger scale.
And we can say from the European perspective that the conditions in Sweden are so good because you have a vast potential of renewable energy plus nuclear. So this mix of renewable and nuclear, so the non-fossil and clean aspect, renewable and clean aspect, makes electricity so available, and also hydrogen. So the production of hydrogen is much cheaper in Sweden. Congratulations! We can learn. We can learn in the rest of Europe.
When we say fossil free, as you say, that means both renewable, indeed, and nuclear under that term.
So let's stay in the Nordics and turn to Vibeke Rasmussen. I mentioned already her position in Yara, which is the biggest fertilizer producer in the world. And you have, in the past years in Yara, dear Vibeke, entered into agreements with huge global food and drinks companies and agricultural cooperatives like PepsiCo and Landmannen, supplying them with fertilizer products made with renewable and low-carbon hydrogen. Still, on the green premium topic, which I asked before on steel, how different is your experience in the fertilizer sector? So what's the similarities, what's the differences in your sector? Please, Vibeke, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jorgo. I would like to start with also saying what is the big difference, I think, from some of these new hard to abate sectors and the new users, like, for instance, steel, cement, maritime, mobility, which are not using hydrogen today. So they are shifting. While as for ammonia and fertilizer, we're already using hydrogen. So we are a big hydrogen producer and user today. So for us, it's really sort of looking at where do you put sort of the mandates and for creating lead markets. Should the onus be on the upstream production, or do you need to distribute it throughout the value chain? I think understanding that the ammonia fertilizer market today actually utilize about a fourth of all hydrogen, with the second largest industry after oil refineries. And then if you go further to the fertilizer value chain, it's really a long and complicated value chain in the food sector. And the users of fertilizers is, of course, the first instance, it's the farmers. So you're putting onus sort of on farmers and the food chains, and really the demand we see today is completely, there is nobody really asking today specifically in the end user sector for decarbonized or renewable fertilizer. So for us, it's really how do we get across and work along the value chain? And therefore we have engaged, and we are very happy of the front runners like Lantmännen and then PepsiCo, who is then helping the farmers and demanding that they will actually be then distributing or paying the additional costs for the farmers to utilize low carbon fertilizers. And I think this is what we need to look at, is how do we actually get this value chain to move together? Because for if you put the honors like now the Renewable Energy Directive only on the upstream production, while there is no demand for the products downstream, you will just end up closing down the industry in Europe. So I think it's detrimental to really understand and look at the complete value chain and creating policies and mechanisms that will actually enable decarbonization of the total value chain.
So basically you're saying, if we don't look at the demand side, if we don't make sure that young people prefer food, drinks that are produced with these green fertilizers, possibly also following a marketing strategy, it will be very difficult, correct? So you need demand side activities. What about incentives via the EU agricultural policy? So if farmers would get a premium if they use these fertilizers, would that be an option that could help?
I think so. In essence, what we're saying is that unless you and me go to the shop and ask for decarbonized food, which we tend to not do yet, then it's done is on how do you decarbonize that value chain. And I think there are mechanisms. We need to look at what can we incentivize, what can we mandate, how do we distribute it throughout the value chain. And I think definitely there are creating lead markets for this is not only on the ammonia, but we need to look further down, on the lead market and include then in the Accelerated Act also fertilizer or food chain or agri companies or retailers, on how do we together create mechanisms that will create both, the push and the pull in the value chain.
Can you shed a light very shortly on the fertilizer industry in Europe? Because I think with the Russian war, with the war in Ukraine, we saw a big change, right? Because the access to cheap natural gas was broken down, it did break down. And so the fertilizer production in Europe had some difficulties. Is that correct?
Well, I think you would see ammonia production, because today, of course, ammonia is a global commodity. So you will always have to curtail, production when you're producing at a much higher cost than the market is doing. So that is really shifting. You will see curtailments happening in different parts of the world, but that was what was happening in Europe. But I think also the challenge for the fertilizer industry in what happened with the war of Ukraine, also when Europe is sanctioning Russian gas, we're pushing it down to then they're producing then on fertilizer, and that's coming into the market. If we do it on will the food chain, we need to ensure that we're not just pushing the problem down the value chains.
So to say it clearly, Russian fertilizers coming into the market and cheaper possibly than European fertilizer production. And then on top you have this green issue, so price goes up. So we see clearly lead markets are also a mechanism to master basically this price issues, to bring it down, or to oblige people who have deep pockets, but normally the end consumer in food has not the deepest pockets, or to give a green premium. Understood. Let me turn back to Jens, because Jens is not only in the industry committee and budget control, but also in the delegations to Japan, where he is a he's a member in this delegation, and he's a substitute member also in the delegation for the US. So Japan, US, also big hydrogen destinations. How do you see us Europeans, dear Jens, in comparison to these geographies? Can we create lead markets in order to cope with them? Because Japan is one of the first movers globally on hydrogen in general. How would you see us compared to these geographies? So second, Jens. Did I lose you?
Yes. Okay. Japan and US are quite constructive cases. So there is no deeper relation between than the one between the EU and Japan. So in trade, in strategic partnership, in energy, in everything, we have the most developed relations are with Japan. And when we look at the Japanese economy, they have exactly the same issues than the European ones. You're right. They're going straightforward with hydrogen. Unfortunately, the decarbonized or green hydrogen doesn't play the biggest role in Japan. They're quite struggling stateside with the development of the renewables. Fortunately, Japan is a country where in the provinces, the governors can do a lot. So, and if the governors are open for developing renewables, what they are, then this is increasing. The most hydrogen they produce in Japan today is from coal. They import from Australia. That is not okay. That makes hydrogen, but not of course not the one that we want to see. So when we protect European production, what we do in a way by creating lead markets, we would not damage the trade relations with Japan a lot, because the trade relations are much broader and deeper than the sectors where we would like to have a lead markets for hydrogen in, and I really don't see that this would become a major issue. Yeah, quite contradictions to US. I mean, when we look at the recent conflict we have, then this is caused by the US side accusing Europe that we have an unbalanced exchange of goods. That is correct. So we export more goods to US than we import from there. But when you add the services, we are in a different story. Then it is quite even, because the services we get from US is much more than services we bring to US. So when we look at the lead markets we would like to invent in a way, then it would probably it could be used by the US government as an excuse for even deepening the tensions and the struggle. But when we look at the substance, US is more a market for exports of European steel than Europe is a place of import. So when we create a lead market for green steel in Europe, we would not push American steel out of the market. We would do that for the domestic market, what is not of American concern. I don't see that. And because if it could be easily countered by the US if they start producing green steel by themselves, what they could do. So I do not see that this would increase the trade struggles, unless you want to take it as an opportunity to struggle. That is absolutely possible when we look at the American at the Trump administration, because ratio and logic is you cannot find there to a large extent. But I wouldn't stop thinking about lead markets in Europe because of that.
Can I stick with the global dimension for a second, talking about India, Jens? Because India at the moment is discussing with the EU an FTA, a free trade agreement. India is one of the friendly partners. However, biggest steel producer in the world is ArcelorMittal, and Mittal is an Indian entrepreneur. We have recently seen that ArcelorMittal in Germany rejected basically the production of steel based on green hydrogen in Germany. And well, I would like to discuss that on a global level. They are right, no? Because it makes sense to produce basically steel where the production cost of hydrogen is very, very, very low. We talked about Sweden, so Sweden, a good example. It doesn't make sense to then go to Australia, I don't know, or Chile or Namibia, Mauritania. Mauritania has iron ore, where these production costs are low. What I want to say is it a good idea to bring hydrogen to Europe and iron ore to Europe and to have the full value chain here? I will discuss that also, of course, with Philip and Agnes, but I would like to have your take on this first, Jens.
So my answer would be twofold. I talked about resilience in my opening remarks, and this is still a valid argument, I think. So Europe should take care that we have a functioning, innovative steel sector on European soil. Maybe it is not a coincidence that when I look at the big German steel enterprises, which I know best, I cannot say too much about the situation of steel in Sweden or other European countries. But when you look at Saarstahl, the state is in. When you look at Salzgitter, the state is in. When you look at ThyssenKrupp, I think it's quite possible that the state goes in the next 2 or 3 years. There's ArcelorMittal as a global steel producer. For them, it's easy to, reshuffle the production from one ArcelorMittal factory to another. There are ones in France, they are in Spain, they are in Germany, they're in Poland, they're in lots of European places. And the sweet thing for them is if they find unadvantageous circumstances in one country, they can shuffle the production to another. And that's what they do. And when I look at the prices of green hydrogen that we can expect in Spain, where the production of green electricity is ample and easier than it is in Germany, they might reshuffle the production to there. But it is a sentence or a law of economy that production follows the sooner or later the cheaper energy prices. And when I look at a global perspective, why should India or Algeria as an energy producer be their development perspective be prohibited? Yeah, we should take them as a partner. We should protect our own production in terms of increased resilience. But of course, they can develop, and they should, because they are more reliant partners.
Absolutely understood. So we understand that if we want to keep the whole value chain in Europe, we need to understand we need mechanisms for that. Otherwise, so we have CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Yes, fine, but possibly not enough. So Philip, we talk a lot about public procurement as a mechanism here. So I've heard a lot about this Deutsche Bahn or other rail companies that now need to refurbish their rail systems. A lot of steel. Could we do, because they are partly nationalized, these rail companies, could we not ask for a procurement that obliges basically to use in that renewal of rail systems green steel? Similar new bridges or wind parks that we are building, wind turbines, lots of steel. What about public procurement as the main driver for uptake of these products of green steel? Commission is currently revising the EU public procurement legislation, not least to make them more suitable for non-price criteria. This is also in our chat, one of the questions of the chat. So would it be possible to use the public procurement clearly as the main mechanism, at least in the steel sector? What's your take on that?
Thanks. Maybe I can spend 2 sentences on what Jens Geier just said on relocation before I come to public procurement.
With pleasure. With pleasure.
Because I agree that the renewable energy potential, the clean energy potential in other countries outside of the EU, but also within the EU, which are not current production locations. So for instance, not Germany. So energy prices are going to be lower there. So there will be substantial pressure for some of the very energy intensive industries to relocate. And I think that's also fine, because to keep them forever, like ammonia production, for instance, or some other type of very energy intensive industries in Germany would in the long term require permanent subsidies. And that's bad business. And it's also bad for the energy transition. So in the medium and long term, there should be some relocation of energy-intensive industries within the EU and potentially also outside of the EU, always making sure that then what is relocated also produces in a green way. And there are lots of papers and thinkers out there who make proposals how to ensure that this is actually possible and that it stays green. You mentioned CBAM, but that's just one of the many instruments needed there. But going to your question on public procurement, indeed, I think that's going to be a main lever and one that's high up on the agenda right now. And one reason why it is so popular is that given the political climate at the moment, it's easier to introduce because the cost will be with the state, right? It's not a tool where the companies have to pay a higher price. So easier to get kind of the political will for this, but also potentially a very expensive tool for taxpayers. And I think the examples you gave with the clean steel and the rail tracks are very good ones. And one issue that I see is that the EU Commission is currently thinking about public procurement kind of along the way it thought in the Net Zero Industry Act. But there we see that the public procurement provisions were not super effective. So I think what we need now needs to go beyond that. And we quickly need definitions for what the clean products are, because if we don't define what green steel is, then we can't incentivize it with public procurement. And second, it also needs speed again. You mentioned the public procurement directive revision that's currently scheduled only for the end of next year. So the Commission proposal, until that's implemented by the member states, too much time is going to have gone by. So I think to accelerate that would be quite important. And then just quickly, one big political change that I also see is the willingness in member states to give the Buy European clauses a try, including in public procurement. And France, for instance, has always been on board with this, but now also other member states are much more willing to try this. And here I think one needs to distinguish a little bit where the objective is to have a quick deployment with cheap products, and whether the objective is more climate oriented, then Buy European clauses can make everything more expensive and slow things down. But where the objective is more focused on EU-based production and where EU-based production has economic benefits for the whole economy, there Buy European clauses can make a lot of sense.
You mentioned that taxpayers, even with procurement rules change, will need to pay, but they do so in other geographies as well. So in China, with all the state aid, hidden state aid that is given, it's state aid. It's also taxpayers they're paying. And the question is, if we lose all these jobs in steel production or in industry, taxpayer also needs to pay, because then we have a lot of problems in the social sector that need to be fixed. So it's a planning that we need to do, and that's why our discussion about the geopolitical change, where you have a Chinese model and now a new American model with America First, brings the old European idea of well, let's have access to markets. Let's no go for buy European or buy French, buy Spanish, because we don't want to lose the access to markets. It comes to an end. Well, that's what we sense here. So the geopolitical change, is that something you also see?
Yes, I do. And maybe the other panelists also want to pitch in on this. But indeed, I think the geopolitical changes here, and also with a view to what's happening in the US, and there's more of a willingness among European governments and the European Commission to kind of prioritize European interests. And I mean, the World Trade Organization is not working too well anymore. So there's also, Europe needs to find its place within this kind of changing and more complicated new environment. I think it always makes sense to uphold rule of law and international rules, but to the extent that other geopolitical entities are not playing by the rules, then Europe also needs to be prepared to retaliate and stand its ground.
Yeah, we saw Mrs. von der Leyen presenting basically a new WTO, a new concept of a WTO, starting with some Asian countries, Asia-Pacific countries. Interesting. But indeed, let's come to Agnes and stick to steel, the procurement issue. I would be interested in having your view, Agnes, on procurement, because currently roughly 11% of the steel market is directly driven by public procurement, which is quite a lot, which means action on this field could really affect the business models of clean steel manufacturers. Would quotas and mandates in public procurement be effective out of your SSAB experience? Because you are in that market already, and you experience that already, and possibly in Sweden you have something like that already. Agnes.
Yeah, thank you. I would first take a step back to, I mean, we're discussing the importance of demand side measures generally, and I think we all agree on that, and that public procurement is a part of this. As was mentioned also, I mean, it's really a concrete tool that policymakers can focus on to promote this market creation. But it's also one where they can lead by example. And I think today, you have certain non-price criteria, but they might not be used to the full extent possible. So from our perspective, we think that there is indeed potential to focus more on public procurement, and that you should further align them with sustainability goals. And something that we have, for example, thought about there could be binding environmental and climate criteria to introduce that. Then, of course, there are other potential ways to go forward, as you were mentioning as well, when it comes to public procurement. But I think also here the value chain perspective is important. We, or SSAB, is perhaps rarely covered directly by public procurement, but we can, as was explained initially, provide others with steel that could be, beneficial in this context. So we think public procurement could play a bigger role in promoting low emission technologies, but with that said, public procurement is not enough. There are several tools and approaches, and also we think that, no, it's not enough. Also, you need to look at other tools, but also, for example, voluntary initiatives that are in place. You have the First Movers Coalition, for example, that's also wanting to boost demand. So I think you need to take a bit of a broader and more holistic view on how you can create these lead markets and this demand. but that indeed public procurement could play a bigger role than it does right now. And I would also like to echo what the previous speaker was saying about the importance of clear definitions, because you really need to underpin all these demand-side policies with a clear definition, classification system for decarbonized steel or for near and low and near zero emission steel. And I think there you also had some mentions of this at the start of the webinar. And yeah, it's encouraging to see that concrete steps are being taken forward, and we're following also very closely what they are doing in Germany on this topic already.
I'm fascinated about that way in the Nordics, and especially in Sweden. You do the cooperation. I mean, Scania is already trying to get green steel. We saw IKEA, so this is or Volvo also. This is strong Scandinavian approach, and yeah, we could learn from that volunteer basis. There's one technical question. Not sure whether you want to answer this. It's the amount of fresh iron that needs to be used. I mean, Sweden is a typical iron ore country, so you don't have that problem, but others need to import iron ore. However, you could of course work with scrap in the electric arc, and that's the question here. How high this percentage of fresh iron needs to be. The question here from Dieter Brückner says EU should be able to reduce import of iron ore and use more scrap for steel industry, adjusting capacity to EU demand without overcapacity, like in Germany today. Don't know whether you want to comment on this.
Maybe more generally on the topic of scrap and iron ore. Yes. I think it's indeed an important one, as you say, because if you look at the sector overall, there isn't enough steel scrap to meet the demand, neither today nor in the coming decades. So if there would have been enough scrap for everyone, of course, that's what we should be using. But there is and will remain for the foreseeable future a need also for an iron ore based steel production to meet demand. And then, of course, when you shift from blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces, etc., you also increase flexibility on what kind of input that you are using. But I think also when it comes to the definitions, it's important there to take into consideration both of these and to take into consideration present technology and emissions, but also the transformation efforts that the steel industry needs to make, in particular the iron ore based, where the majority or the major share of the emissions still lies. So yeah,
excellent.
An overall comment on that topic.
Thank you. It's very, very helpful to understand this. So not enough scrap. We need fresh iron ore. Vibeke, maybe procurement rules in the food sector are not the right approach, but maybe you want to comment on that. I have also in the chat a question with regards to the agricultural sector in general. Agricultural sector doesn't get the emission done, and should be easy for them to guide and adjust subsidy schemes more stringently to lower their carbon footprint by using green products like fertilizers. So this is to bring down the emissions there. I would like also to combine that with the global approach. I mean, we see a lot of green ammonia production globally. Recently, we have seen the announcement of Adani, biggest green ammonia facility in India, being issued. How do we deal with that? Isn't it possible just to import the green ammonia and then to turn it last mile into fertilizer in Europe? You have the global overview, dear Vibeke. So how do we create lead markets with this global importing dimension? And let alone, I'm really fascinated to see how other geographies, in this case, I mentioned India, accelerate the pace. I mean, they are much faster. They started only in 22 with talking and thinking about hydrogen. We did it already much earlier. So Jens being the rapporteur in the European Parliament on the strategy, but they are much faster. How can we basically adjust these speed of others to our lead markets? Do you have an idea here, Vibeke?
First, I would want to say also what's been said for steel here on the resilience. I think we need to ensure that we keep ammonia and fertilizer production in Europe as well. This is about our food security in the end of the day, and we don't want to be that completely dependent on outside. So we need a mix. I think, yes, we say the molecule on ammonia is today, it's a global commodity market. And I think for Europe, we probably need both. We need import and we need our own production. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's a yes, we need both. For the procurement or public procurement in fertilizer sector is not really a large. It will not create a large market. So we need to look at other mechanisms, and I think I like also what you showed on the steel. We need sort of a harmonized definition, as been said here, on what is low carbon products. I think we need to look at different sectors, because this is very sector specific. So I think it's really creating some form of mandated, maybe, or at least a harmonized label. And then you might need to, as was said here, we need to mandate, how do you decarbonize, and where do you do it in the value chain, and where do you push, you need to have the push and the pull, and how do we put mandate in? I think for the fertilizer sector in Europe also said that somehow on creating some lead market and including in the early days of the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, also the fertilizer or food chain industry, I think is important. Even if it's not a huge public procurement opportunity in that sector. But I think it's such a large sector also for the hydrogen ammonia value chain that not including it would be a failure, I think, in early days. As you say, other sectors and India and others are moving quicker. We see China. I think in what is the biggest challenge in Europe at the moment is our energy costs. So it goes back again to that. It's the cost that is really the challenge for us, and willingness to pay that added premium we need on the end product because of the cost, which is a challenge, and therefore it might be cheaper to produce the electrons elsewhere in the world and transport molecules to Europe. And that is something we definitely have to take into account. But I don't think that should be our only solution.
Many thanks. I think it helps to understand. So we have some 5 minutes left, and I would like all of you to comment on the main legislative piece where the lead markets will be embedded, and that's this Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. Sorry, I would like you to say the one wish you would have to be part of that. Maybe I can start with you, Vibeke, to stay with you, and Jens, I would end with you because you basically are one of the co-legislators here. Vibeke, what's your one wish?
I think to include more sectors and downstream players, to ensure that you don't again put the honors on the ones that already have the honors from the Renewable Energy Directive targets.
Excellent. I continue with Agnes.
Yes, I think it's very important that this is put forward in a context where we keep ambition, we keep long-term stable policies when it comes to climate, ETS, etc. We have now the 2040 proposal from yesterday, so this is really embedded in a framework that gives stability and predictability for industry that is doing the transition. And then I will mention the permitting, that this will be streamlined and well put forward. There's an opportunity to make changes also there.
Faster permitting, that's also a clear message. Thank you. Philip.
Yeah, on the high level, I think the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act needs to be very bold. But given that we're talking about lead markets, I think it's important that we have lead markets in there for a variety of products. And those should be, at least some of them, need to be not voluntary, but binding. Because if they're voluntary, then oftentimes for various reasons, governments are not going to apply them.
Excellent. So binding rules, we heard that a lot. Also banks telling us we will enter into, financing the hydro market if there are obligations and fines. So you need to know what is the fine if I don't do it. So very well. Jens, what's your wish?
I would say everything that brings energy prices down, because the lower the energy prices are, the more competitive hydrogen will become. And the lead markets are an instrument to create demand. And I like this instrument, as I said before, but we need probably less of this instrument. The less of this instrument, the more competitive the hydrogen prices become. So bringing down the energy prices will be key to me, and by that bringing compatibility on global level up. That's absolutely key in order to keep industry and protect society.
Excellent. Many thanks for all these answers. I see comments in the chat and also questions. One regards the technologies, so CCUS mentioned here as a preferred way. I can share with you an information. One big Norwegian player that is looking into CCS, Equinor, is now looking into methane pyrolysis, which is the way to split methane into clean hydrogen and carbon solid. It gives you two feedstocks, hydrogen that you also can use for other things, and carbon solid, which gives you the possibility to do graphene, graphite, but also carbon char, which is important for agriculture. What I want to say is there are many technologies that we can integrate into lead markets. And if we look at the trajectories, I showed you this labeling system of the steel industry, it is possible to integrate it regarding the decarbonization aspect they fulfill. So this might answer this question. And there's one final question, which is the final consumer going to pay the green fee? Well, I think, and I come back to what Jens said, resilience also plays a role. And there's not only the defense resilience, there's also social resilience. We only can have strong societies if people have jobs. So it is an effort to keep these jobs also here. And that's why resilience must be seen in a broader sense. And that's why it's so important to look at the decarbonization issues. We have a very hot summer already. We know that it's urgent, but to see both sides, decarbonization and climate aspects and resilience also with regards to jobs. I would like to thank you. Lead markets are basically a possibility we have learned today to do the first step into clean industrial efforts. Lead markets are a regulatory sandbox. They are not, as some people in the Commission said, an invention by Mr. Chatzimarkakis to circumvent the delegated acts. No. Lead markets have been invented by the European Commission, I think in 2007 already. But it's now the time to implement them. It's now the time to show that they can work, that this concept can work. I said that we waited some 7 years regarding RED II, Renewable Energy Directive 2 and 3, to have green hydrogen in the refining. 7 years and even not transposed. We don't have that time anymore. So lead markets might help us to accelerate all this. And I am very, very grateful to all of you to have shared your ideas with us. I would like to remind you that 29th of September, that's maybe a slide we can show, or I say it like this, we have our Hydrogen Week. That's 29th of September until 3rd of October with the 4 commissioners that will join us there. and ministers from member states and members of parliament. So we will discuss everything hydrogen in that big event at the Square in Brussels. And we would like to welcome you there. Without further ado, this was our last H2 Talk before the summer break. We would like to wish you a good summer. Well, relax, because we will need to create the lead markets after summer. So you need some power. Thank you very much. And with this, bye-bye until our next H2 Talk. Bye. Thank you. Tusen Tag.